Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm Dr. Angel Storm. I'm the founder of Ashes to Beauty Ministries, and I am bringing on with me Dan Paddock. I am so excited for everybody to get to meet him and to hear a little bit of his story. We are launching the Forgiveness Mentorship course, which I ran for the first time last year, and Dan will be the co-leader this year. So we are so excited to kind of just introduce Dan to y'all and talk to you guys about the Forgiveness Mentorship Program as well. So welcome, Dan. Thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you.
Yes. So I wanted to take time, first of all, to introduce people to the Forgiveness Mentorship course, and then kind of talk about you and your role in that, your own experience, and just allowing people to get to know you and your story a little bit. So for those of you who are not familiar, I have an unmoved mentorship series, and there's 3 different categories. The first is life after narcissism. The second is forgiveness. And the third is building trust. And this is the second one. We do those each one time a year. And forgiveness is really just the process of learning how to forgive yourself, other people that may have been involved in your situation during your abuse, maybe the abuser themselves, as well as other people, like maybe trust. They have sorry for that feedback, with God or other issues like that. So it takes you through the whole process of identifying who you need to forgive and how to go about letting go of that trauma and that hurt. And just a quick note, this week only is it's pay what you want. So instead of paying the full price, you can pay whatever's on your heart. To join, you can find the links to all of that in the description of this video, so you can go get that right now or as soon as you want to. Again, that's this week only. So I've known you for a little while now, Dan, and I'm so excited to bring you on because you bring a lot of different aspects of this entire concept of narcissistic abuse, forgiveness, and as well as spirituality, like the mind, body, spirit, functions of how all of these things are impacted. You're a pastor. You've been in ministry for like 30 years, over 30 years, and you have experience with this your own self as well. And I'm wondering if you could just kind of introduce yourself and talk about where you are now, and maybe just share a little bit about your own experience and how you think that will impact the mentorship program.
Yeah, so really good to be with you all today, and thanks for tuning in. Yes. My name is Dan Paddock. I am a pastor in Kentucky. I serve a church as a senior minister there, and not a large church. We are pretty active, actually, but and right now it's a little less active, unfortunately, but we still do some number of things online, et cetera, so forth. I have been in ministry for 30 years. I started out as a youth minister back in 1989, very, very young back then, and did work in youth and Christian education for 6 years before moving to Kentucky to go to seminary. And then seemed like my seminary journeys were forever because I did a whole lot of schooling over the course of that time, and been in ministry really since that place as a pastor. So yes, on the one end, the local church ministry, I've done a lot of that. I've done about a decade's worth of work in corrections in some form or another. Taught classes in corrections for a while. Also did some work with probation and parole and juvenile justice. So seen that end of things, and also even a little bit of diving into data analysis work, and just a number of things. I always love crunching numbers, et cetera, so forth. So those are some of my quote unquote career elements. I've done some writing, written some a book and some literature, mostly curriculum for all ages, by the way. children all the way up to adults in Bible study. So a lot of ministry experience to be sure. I also am a part of a Christian strongman team. So what we do is we do a lot of strength athletic work to share the gospel, kind of a creative way. It's called a Megaforce Strength Team, and been doing that for now almost a decade. In fact, next month will be the 1 decade anniversary of being with them, and a lot of fun. So that's a little bit of my ministry background. My education is I have 3 master's degrees in divinity, spirituality, and theology, and then about 60 hours of additional graduate work, much of it on the doctoral level. I don't know, I love being a student, so I may go back again at some point, but right now I'm kind of glad to take a little bit of the break and just do a little bit of teaching and sharing and coaching, as opposed to absorbing from the student point of view. I also do a little teaching at a Christian school, just a couple of classes, but sure love it. It's really wonderful, and work with juniors and seniors, high school age. It's just a lot of fun. Yeah.
Oh, no, that's great. Wow. So you can already see the wealth of experience that Dan is bringing into this program, and I'm so excited to have you on board. And Dan, you've actually experienced narcissistic abuse your own self as well. And not only did you experience it your own self, but you were a pastor at the time. So can you talk a little bit about that aspect of your experience, why this is such an interesting topic, to talk about in general, but also why it's so near and dear to your heart to help people recover from this. And can you just share a little bit about your own story, your own process of forgiveness throughout that whole thing? And again, the dynamic with you being in the role of a pastor and enduring all of this abuse. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, one of the things that I discovered very early in my life was I had a number of interesting things that I didn't realize were major struggles at the time. When I was a kid, I was getting picked on and bullied a lot. And one of the reasons that I mention that is because on the one end, it makes certain things that you do in life, unfortunately, you internalize struggles in ways that maybe cause you not to be able to forgive. And that was a struggle in my life. I remember in ministry, I was in ministry almost no time at all when I had a parishioner that really was rather narcissistic in how they kind of handled dealing with me. They basically pulled me aside and said, "Look here," and they didn't use the word kid, but that's kind of what they were insinuating. They basically said, we've been here a lot longer than you have, and we're going to be here long after you're gone. So if you think that you can pull some reins or do this, you've got another thing coming. And I just remember that was really, it was ego kind of taking over, and it made you start realizing that you have relationships in life where people's ego, if they're not careful, will take over. And then it depends on how much does that ego permeate into a person's total being as to whether or not you can have really normal functioning relationships. And that really is vital. And it's something that we don't really talk about nearly enough. We all have ego, but if someone is so saturated in their ego and the way they deal with things, it has profound effects on people, especially, interestingly enough, people who are rather empathic. The people who are empathic, that care, they're going to tend to be more grace-centered and oriented and kind and gracious and maybe even forgiving of others. And then turn around, and if they're not careful, they get stepped on a lot. And it's really miserable. I had it happen in ministry a number of times, especially early on, and that was a struggle. But I did not even come close to realizing how bad it was going to be until I got married when I was about, I wasn't quite 30 years of age, and literally married someone who really, really struggled with what I would call heavy narcissism, a narcissistic personality struggle. Absolutely. I could give you so many examples of that, but long and short of it was, if they weren't in control, they would react with some form of verbal or eventually physical abuse. So if I did something they didn't like, really couldn't stand on my own 2 feet without getting slapped or hit or punched. And that happened early on in my marriage, really, honestly, weekly basis early on. It got a little bit slower, which was good on the one end, but the verbal stuff was pretty regular. And one of the interesting things that really opened my eyes to the fact that this was a very unhealthy thinking was that after literally almost every word that would come out of their mouth was some form of order. You do this, you do that, almost like I was the subordinate. And one day I asked, I said, you could ask. And then they literally looked at me and said, who the hell do you think you are? And that really opened my eyes to like, oh my word, I'm really not dealing with someone who is what I would call healthily looking at themselves or the person that they're with. And that was a major struggle. Now, it's interesting because sometimes people will look at appearances and say, I don't know about this. Okay, so you look at me today and you would look like, okay, I'm 6'1", 265, 270 pounds. I look like I played football. Yeah, that's how I look. But here's the interesting thing. When I was married, I didn't look like that. I was big, but never been to the gym a day in my life. Actually, I almost take the experience that I had of having that physical and mental abuse as a huge catalyst toward getting me to work on my person in the physical realm. And partly I wanted to get bigger and stronger, in essence, just so that I wouldn't get bullied, picked on, or treated or misused or abused by someone with a narcissistic personality. And the interesting thing about that is that I still have generally speaking, a gentle nature for the most part in how I deal with people. But even in the midst of that nature, there was this piece that wanted to protect. And I think a lot of us have that, but then we don't necessarily know how to grab it. And then the problem is that if someone is really hurting you, really mistreating you, abusing you, then you're trying to figure out, okay, well, how do I protect myself? And then another piece that you don't even realize is how do you put yourself in a position to where you can totally cut the bonds of that unhealthy relationship? And forgiveness is a huge important piece to that. But it's hard to do because if you've been the one that's been slapped or berated, cursed or what have you, your own thinking is sometimes one of vengefulness or one of, oh yeah, well, I'll show you. And that's pretty natural. It's kind of a human instinct to some degree. But if that still permeates who you are in your mind or in your heart, it can totally transform who you are, and it's hard to get out of that. And that's why forgiveness is so huge and so important. So I was in that relationship for 5 years, and the one important thing to understand about marriage is, someone can do something that's very, very toxic against you. I have to learn and own up to the fact that I made mistakes as well. I was very passive aggressive. I didn't take care of my physical self as much as I could have. I didn't find sometimes the healthy mechanisms by which to deal in a relationship. And I'm not trying to say it's all my fault, but I'm also trying not to say it's all their fault either. Mine was a situation where there was no excuse for the abuse. At the same time, I had to learn how do I move forward? The healthiest way to move forward is finding ways to forgive and remove yourself from toxicity and grow who you are. For a while, I wasn't growing who I was at all. In fact, if anything, I was retreating and hiding. And that's not good either, because what forgiveness does is it gives you the freedom to go and pursue who you are to the best of your abilities, to grow who you are without all the junk and the baggage that is attached. And that took years, honestly, to really move from and recover from. And I think that the process of forgiveness There's a lot of it that can be done fairly quickly, but then there's a whole lot of it. It's a work in progress through your whole life too. So just have to be aware of that, and hope that helps a little bit. I could get more specific on some of the toxicity, but it was crazy. You could get hit for things as simple as you changed the setting of the ceiling fan. No, I didn't. Yes, you did. It changed, but I didn't do it. Whack. I remember those kinds of things, or getting hit because I didn't have a map when I was driving to my parents' house, which I knew where they lived, so I didn't need one. And little things of control. And sometimes the control is just, it's tough. So what ended up happening was I divorced 5 years later, and began a process of staying in ministry. Actually, I'd offered my resignation when I divorced because I felt like that could be a black spot on the church. The people were very kind and gracious. They understood that, I was in a difficult place, and I was trying to grow who I was and trying also to, recover. And people were very kind and gracious and loving. It's really important to have that kind of support group helping you along the way. I remember that very first year, so I was very fragile in my mind in a lot of ways. But one of the things that I discovered was where I moved to while I was still at the church, was literally right next door to a gym. And so I was like, I probably should go there. I've never been to a gym a day in my life here. I was 35 years of age. And when I mean not a day in my life, I'm dead serious. I remember 6 or 7 years earlier, a pastor, a friend of mine who was in his 60s, had invited me to the gym with me. And he had so much more stamina at 63 or 4 years of age, with a heart problem, by the way. I didn't find out till later, than I had in my I guess it was that time, late 20s. So out of shape in so many ways. I graduated high school at 150, got all the way to 300 pounds over about the course of 12 years. And because some of my anxiety and struggles, I turned to eating.
Wow.
A lot of sugar. Eventually we ended up being diabetic because I was absorbing so much sugar in my body as a way of keeping me awake. I wanted to sleep 10 or 12 hours a day. I was struggling with depression. So many things that were all happening during the marriage and then leading into exiting the marriage. And, I had a few people say, you need to exercise. So I went to the gym, and first day I remember my muscles were really sore, but I was like, I guess so. I need to think that, okay, do a little bit today, and then maybe a few days from now, try to do a little bit more. And it didn't even take a week before it was exciting. And it also helped the fact that the lady that trained me for about half an hour, she was 15 years older than me, and she looked probably 5 to 10 years younger than me, because she kept herself so fit. And my thinking was, gosh, that would be kind of cool to be able to try to be fit enough to almost defy age. And those things, help. But then I didn't realize I'd heard it. But the more I worked out, the more I started feeling better up here, started feeling a little better here. And then it started beginning, I'm getting stronger, and that felt good. And then I really like getting stronger, and then I like getting bigger. And then the interesting thing was, I was also like, you know what? Now that I'm big, people won't pick on me anymore. Because I was bullied in high school, and then I was literally bullied in my marriage. And I was like, people maybe not pick on me anymore. I don't like to be picked on, And so, then I struggle with that. But here was something else that a lot of people don't realize is a lot of people don't know, but I sang for a while, and I never was a very good singer. But if you listen to me, you think, I kind of is almost like a kid-like voice and stuff like that. But all the time that I sang in choir, I actually got to sing in choir with Kristen Chenoweth at college because I went to school with her at the same time. I sang low bass. A lot of people don't know that. So, those songs that are the real deep low bass, which really sounds like a masculine thing. I've always was drawn to that. So, but my home is over Jordan. Well, that was how my voice was a little bit more natural. But what I also discovered was, as I was getting bigger, people were starting to think I was maybe a bully. And then I was like, hey, if you're a pastor, that's the last thing that you want to have happen. And so what I discovered is, as I was getting bigger and stronger, and here I was in my 30s, I need to be more of just natural, gregarious, almost childlike, more free. And as I was gaining confidence and freedom, was forgiving more, the energy started bubbling up in my voice, and I used my voice as a way to put people at ease when they would see me. Because let me just tell you, if you've been the recipient of abuse in the hands of a narcissist, you hate being on that end. But then it also gives you sympathy if someone sees you, and maybe because of their own abuse, they look at you and they say, "Ooh, he's big," and they're afraid. I was a graduate student reading Thomas Merton at the Bellarmine University, and I got called security on me because I looked like I was out of place, older than the traditional student, and I was wearing a shirt similar to this, and someone just said, "I don't think he's supposed to be here," and I would have loved to say, "Hey, this is Thomas Merton. He's a monk. You celebrate him in your religion department. I promise you, I'm just being a graduate student here." But I didn't look like a traditional student. And so you start recognizing things on the other end as well. You don't want people to feel like someone is out to get you. You don't want people to feel like you might be the narcissist. And so I've worked real hard. Well, I love the strength training and stuff. I worked real hard to seem more approachable. Hopefully, after a few seconds, people realize you're just a fun-loving, nice guy, But gosh, in work, I've had people that maybe in their own struggles with their first impression or stereotype was he looks like he gave trouble, and that's a fascinating dynamic. But here's the cool thing in all that experience. In some ways, as much as I didn't like it, wouldn't trade it. Only from the standpoint of it's helped me to so much more better see the beauty of people and how precious they are in God's eyes, and how you want to be as approachable and kind and gentle as you can for their sake. So whether it's coaching or pastoral work, whatever, I work real hard to do that to this day. And so in other words, being the recipient. I don't really want to say victim, although I think victim can be a very appropriate term. You can be a victim of narcissism, absolutely. But at the same time, I was a recipient of it, and I try not to be victimized by it, if that makes sense. But when you receive it, it can help you become more empathetic to other people. And I think over time that's helped me stand up a little bit more on my own. And at the same time, it's also helped me to recognize that, all of us, if we're not careful, can dive into narcissism in ways that we want to avoid. Then how does forgiveness help you pull out of that? How does a forgiving heart to others and a forgiving heart to yourself? So it's a little bit of, a little bit of my story. So much more to share. I don't know if you have any questions, but glad to answer any.
No, that's great, Dan. Thanks so much for sharing that. I like what you were talking about earlier when you said that you noticed that the weight that you would lose through forgiveness translated into weight that you would lose in your body. And throughout the course, that's something that I really try to hit on. I believe in doing body, soul, and spirit, addressing all three of those areas. Because if you're only addressing two, you still have at least one working against you, that's not coming into agreement with the other two parts. And throughout the course, that is something that is mentioned. Your physical health is going to reflect your own internal journey. So the work that you do internally, you're going to notice it on the outside. The things that you take care of inside that are buried up in there, when you start releasing them, you're going to start noticing not just the effects in your mind, obviously, less anxiety, less stress, but, better sleeping habits or whatever. You're going to notice it physically in your body as well. So that's awesome. I love that. What do you think are some of the bigger expectations that you may have for people who join us in the forgiveness course? What do you think that they could expect to walk out of this 12-week program with?
Well, one thing is I am convinced that through our sharing and the sharing from each other, you will gain some things you either didn't know before or never realized were that important. I am absolutely convinced of it. I think, Dr. Storm, you are very much aware. You really did a whole lot of academic work and work with the Department of Defense, where your mind was being engaged every day. And you can have those experiences and that training, and every day you're going to be a student to something, and all of us will, no matter how immensely brilliant one may be or how well educated. Whoever comes to this course, they're going to gain some really neat insights that will help in the future. I think one great takeaway that I look forward to all of us sharing is the understanding of the difficulty that we can have to forgive ourselves. Because let's say, for example, we will think of, well, if we're moving from narcissism to forgiveness, yeah, I need to work on forgiving that sorry so-and-so for doing all this stuff to me. Absolutely true. But interestingly enough, sometimes we will find that some of the most difficult journey of forgiveness is also forgiving ourselves. Because we may say, for example, we might say, how did I stay in that relationship that long? They were so mean to me or brutal or what have you, or, I remember my dad one time, he told me, he goes, son, I don't know how you lasted that long in that relationship, being so mean to you and stuff like that. And I would feel guilty. I would feel guilty for, why I should have stayed in longer. And sometimes I was feeling guilty because I was like, how could I not have been smart enough to have left early and not even have been in that relationship? How did I ended up attracting myself to someone that was that way? And I knew they were that way to some degree.
Yep.
You will play all those scenarios in your mind, and you've got to literally say to yourself, hey, give yourself space to forgive yourself. Because to be honest, the most fascinating thing about humanity that I have noticed is if you were to do a in-depth biography of any high achieving, high functioning person, no matter who it is, guarantee you will dig into their life and find something where they're like, how did they make that mistake? That's just crazy. Well, because we all do. I mean, we all make a series of judgments and stuff, and maybe we'll feel guilty and won't forgive ourselves because we'll say, how could I be so blind to that? And the reality is, and this is really important, the loving heart capable of loving is also the heart that will so look past another's faults that they will excuse it by saying, well, I just want to give grace. And that's great, because we need grace to survive. We absolutely need it. So you can't really just sit there and beat yourself up because you extended grace maybe more than you now then think after hindsight 2020 that you should. Forgiveness of yourself is going to be a huge important piece of this process. And we want to help walk people through not only forgiving of that person that did those mean things to you, whoever that was, but help you forgive yourself for whatever mistake you may have made, or just a judgment that turned out to be not the best judgment, because it can happen to any of us. None of us are immune to this.
That's exactly right. And honestly, for my own self, I still have a list of reminders that I read to myself every morning, because it can be very easy, even after years later, and it's truly like, you don't, at this point, for me, I just really don't have the feelings of revenge or anything like that. I really don't. But it can be difficult to have those not creep up for yourself, where it's like, how could I do this? Why would I do that? And how you were saying too about, you look at anybody in history, you'll find that they made mistakes. And the aha moment for me was when I realized, I'm a human, and part of my humanity is going to come out in making mistakes. I'm not ever going to be perfect. It doesn't matter how much education I have or how many people are around me to offer me support, or, regardless of how much good advice I was being given or whatever, none of that stuff can prevent me from never making a mistake. There's always going to be that aspect of my humanity in there. And I need to, it's not even at that point about forgiveness, it's about acceptance. This is true. I will never be perfect this side of heaven. And another thing that for me personally that I had to really work through was forgiving God because I really felt like you knew I was in this situation. You could have stopped it. You could have helped me at any moment. You didn't step in. You didn't do anything to make this not happen. Did you ever feel like that? Or was the fact that you were a pastor, and I just want to quickly say, Peter, we see your question. We'll get to it in just a second. Yeah, as a pastor, did you have any of those feelings, or were you so connected to your creator that you didn't ever have those kinds of thoughts come in?
I think I did some. I think interesting thing, there's a little piece of me that would say, God, why I'm in this situation? And then maybe shortly after I asked that question, there would be a little piece of me because I grew up being very self-defeating. I still struggle with that a little bit, but much, much better at it than I was when I was younger. Be very self-defeating. So as soon as I asked that question, I'm like, you silly, how do you blame God? You're the one that made the decision to be in that relationship. And then start beating myself up over it. And then I was like, and then the interesting thing is, and this is really important, this also makes it more difficult in the journey of forgiveness. See, human beings will tend to caricature people based on a weakness. Sometimes that actually helps in terms of a separation leading to a forgiveness. It's a tool. And we use it all the time in politics, do we not? I mean, for example, you make a caricature of someone on the other side that you don't agree with, and then you basically generalize them and then depersonify them and demonize them. So it's very much a tendency of what you can do when you're looking at the person who's abused you or hurt you, and you do that. And one of the things I would say to myself is, well, Dan, you don't want to live in that realm. Jesus was always looking at people based on being miraculous children of the Almighty, despite their faults. Otherwise, he wouldn't have approached them and been so willing to forgive them. But the thing is that, I would talk about my ex-wife, for example. And so I would say, well, sure, she hits me. And yeah, she says those things, but she is an excellent employee at her work. And she is really good with kids. And, there were a number of superlatives that she had. And I would use those things as ways of, sometimes I use it to justify staying into the relationship. There was a point where it became so toxic. I just realized that, that this isn't going to do you any good to continue in this when someone is really sucking life out of you, because they really can't help their own situation. They just need control, and they've got anger, and they just can't get over it. So all of that to say, if I did say, God, why did you do this? Almost instantly, something would happen and say, well, now, Dan, you did this to some degree. And then I would kind of go through my inventories of faults and flaws. And I think that then you have the question of, well, God, why didn't you pull me out of it? And I think that I have to be really careful on that too, because one of the most beautiful gifts that we're given as human beings, besides the power that God grants us in our hands, our feet, our eyes, our ears, senses, etc., is the gift of freedom. Narcissism is toxic because it oftentimes is one person's attempt to control another. Now, think about that for a minute. If we're saying, God, why don't you pull me out of that? You say, okay, well, if you want God to have that much control in your life, that means you're going to forfeit some degree of freedom. If you think about it in that respect. So God has so much control, but at the same time, he's granting us freedom to make choices and things. And none of us get all the choices exactly right. And then we don't exactly know why this other person did what they did and why they had to be mean to us and stuff like that. And they made their own set of choices, and they were toxic, and they were wrong, and they were affected by it. So, it can be somewhat complicated. But what I would say is that the entire time I am grateful because God found ways of opening doors that I didn't necessarily see at first, to show his providential care, to show he was with me, to show that he loved me, to show that, hey, there are people here that love you. There are people that will walk with you through tough journeys. And there will be lots of wisdom offered you that will really bless you. You just have to choose to listen and choose to trust.
Yeah,
that's why we're offering this course.
So good. Yeah, and I think it's especially fitting to be covering this, this week, Holy Week, and while we're leading up to remembering, the great sacrifice that God gave to us through Jesus and how he forgave all of us. So yeah, great. Awesome answer. Thank you. I want to move on to questions and answers. I had gotten quite a few sent in through email, and Peter is here. I'm putting your question on the screen, or Sarah, can you put the question on? There it is. So Peter's question is basically, can a narcissist never turn around? I really wish I could help her. Please tell me what to do. We have kids. Mm-hmm. Okay. So that's a very common question. Get it all of the time. I actually have 2 videos on that topic specifically. I just want to say you can go check that out on I'm Married to a Narcissist. What should I do? Something along those lines is the title. Dan, do you have a comment on that, or do you want me to answer it?
Well, I'll gladly add to it. And I think that the fact that you have those resources is awesome. I think those would be a good first starting point to really look at to do that question. If you want to go ahead, and I might add a short bit after, just from my own experience.
Yeah, sure. So like, to sum up the video that I did, because I'm asked this quite frequently, each marriage is individual, each situation is individual, each narcissist, even though they have the same characteristics, a lot of the same traits, they're still individuals. So how that's expressed, what your overall goals are, all of these things are individual to you and to your situation. So I would say for you specifically, you need to take a look at, what are your goals? If you stay in the marriage, what are you hoping to do? Is it because you have children that you're staying in the marriage? Because you're teaching your children something, whether you stay or leave. So that's number one. You're either teaching them this is okay, this is right behavior, or once you're in a marriage, you don't leave, or you're teaching the kids another lesson by leaving. So just be aware that no matter what you do, you're still conveying a lesson to your children. Second of all, if your goal is to stay in the marriage until the children are out of school or out of the house or whatever people decide to do, what then? What is going to be your next step then? And if you leave now, what is the goal going to be? You have to really kind of think through all of these things. What do you want to have happen with the children? Like, what would be the ideal situation there? And start looking into steps that you can take, practical steps that you can take now to start preparing for that. So if you know that there's going to be a divorce, you need to start saving money. You need to start calling around. You need to start finding an attorney. These are very practical things that you need to do. Maybe you need to start looking for another house or another place to live, maybe another school district for the kids, however, your situation plays out. In terms of the actual narcissist changing, I refuse to say that people can't change, and even a narcissist, because there's nobody that's outside of the realm or that escapes the eyes of God, and they can still have free will to find a deliverance minister, for example, to seriously take a look at their issues and go through therapy. There's still opportunities for them to have their heart changed. But is it likely? Is it even frequent? No, it isn't. And so I think everybody's situation is different, and what their goals are different, what their overall purpose is, different. And I just say that because I one time met a deliverance minister, now very powerful deliverance minister, by the way, who was married to a narcissist who the Lord refused to allow him to divorce, even though she was physically violent. For 2 years, he was in that relationship, married to this woman. And not until he heard from the Lord clearly did he file for divorce. And he, upon exiting the relationship, God told him, you're being launched as a deliverance minister for this specific reason. Now you have authority over this. So I think everybody's purpose and what they're doing is different. Again, his calling in life isn't the same as everybody else's. So I don't want to say like you have to stay, because I don't at all believe that. I also don't believe like at the first signs of narcissism should you leave. I think it's an individual situation, and you really need to ask yourself the hard questions, and nobody else can answer those except for you. You know, I don't know what your situation is, so we can't, to me, I can't tell you, yes, you need to leave, or no, you need to stay. You have to ask yourself the hard questions and come to that determination on your own. Dan, what do you have to say? How would you answer the question?
Every situation is truly different. And in all my years of pastoral ministry, talking to different people and different struggles, every situation is different. The interesting thing is that scholars can make an argument that Zacchaeus may have had some narcissistic issues. That's interesting because when we look at the story of Zacchaeus, so Luke 19, starting verse 1 and following, we see apparently from his past mistakes that he cheated people, he sort of ran roughshod over people, and yet at the same time, despite his small stature, there was something about the power he was given at the hands of the Roman government to tax that he loved. But he was willing to make a change pretty quick. Now, here's the thing. The reason why I say it is because, is it possible that a narcissist can change? Yes. The reality is that most of us need a long time to make substantial changes. Okay, most of us do. Sometimes we'll go an entire lifetime and not make some very critical needed changes that we needed to make. And the tough thing with people who are struggling with narcissism is a lot of times they will think, well, I'm not doing anything wrong. And so then if you're saying that, you lack the humility necessary to then ask the questions that precipitate the change. So my point is that, is it possible? Yes, every situation is different. A lot of the time it is a long journey and a process if there is change. And for people struggling with narcissism, a lot of times they really struggle to change. So, just keeping those things in mind. But again, every situation is different. So the resources that Dr. Storm are providing are really good to help you think about what steps to take, and take them very, very carefully. Use your time wisely, and however you approach.
Yeah, definitely go and watch that video, because I go through exactly the kinds of questions you need to ask yourself when you're making this decision. And especially because you have kids and you need to think about the environment that you're raising them in and things like that. So go check out that video, because, and I have a few of them, but the most recent one that I did, I listed specifically the kinds of questions that you yourself need to answer, and you're accountable now for those answers, so nobody else can do that for you. So I hope that answers your question, Peter. Moving on to some of the questions that we got through email. Is it possible to love the narcissist but hate narcissism? And if so, how do I do that?
It's a good question. It is possible. Human capacity to love has its own set of limits. I mean, we just need to be honest about that. Although the human capacity to love sometimes will surprise us at how amazingly far we go within those limits. That's the beautiful thing about love, isn't it not? That the love of God that can live in us can give us the capacity to be immensely self-sacrificing, immensely powerful, and immensely energetic to a world that desperately needs that love. So it is possible to love a narcissist and really hate the narcissism. Here's the important caveat to that. The question is, love obviously has to be defined as more than just a feeling, because once you define love then as the action, then the question is, what actions are you giving to love the narcissist? And is that love being productive toward their actual betterment? Because, one of the things that we struggle with sometimes is, well, I keep loving them and they keep just more and more control, et cetera, so forth. And you feel like you're in this loop you can't get out of. That's a very real problem. So many of us have it. We'll get caught in loving someone And then what happens is human nature is, oh, well, they're loving me. That means they're not on me. And that means I can just take it easy, take it for granted, or what have you. And then there's no change that affects. So when you look at love in terms of the action, then you can say, well, listen, the reason I'm offering this, you may not think it's love because it may not come in the nice little beautiful teddy bear package, but it is for the purpose of your betterment. It becomes a tough love of sorts. It may not look like love in terms of the feeling, but it may be. And my point is that if you're going to love the narcissist, but hate the narcissism, then the only way that you can really gauge that is by then asking yourself, what actions of love are you giving, and how well is that toward not just their existence betterment, but in terms of the betterment of changing who they are so that they can be more loving in a very healthy way back to you and to the family maybe that you're in, or the society around you that they are influenced by.
Yeah, and exactly. You know, in the third part of the mentorship course is called trust, and that's exactly what we cover. Like, understanding that you allowing everybody into your life is, first of all, not showing love to yourself. You're not treating the thing that God gave you to manage correctly and appropriately. And second of all, you're enabling other people to step into that trap that this person now believes that these behaviors are acceptable, that they're just fine. You're creating the space that is necessary to create more victims like yourself, or more people who will be on the receiving end of that narcissism like yourself, by not establishing boundaries. So that's so great, Dan. Thank you so much for answering that. We had a comment come in that says, I said, you don't support me. She replied saying, that's because you do things that are stupid and worthless. She's there to criticize and pretend it's all advice. And I guess to that point, you know, again, it's all about, what are you willing to tolerate? What are you willing, you know, where are your boundaries within this situation? So if that's not an appropriate comment to be hearing every day, you're the one who needs to take the stand and to establish boundaries. And this can be really difficult, especially if you don't have any kind of, I don't know, you've been so used to being beaten down that you don't feel like you have a voice, or that your voice isn't being heard. But you also have to realize, like, it's only you that can control what you are put into, the situations that you put yourself in, the conversations that you're willing to absorb, and the people that you're associating yourself with. So if you want something to change, something has to change, you know, and it's kind of learning how to do that. So when you see that somebody isn't going to start taking your advice, it's like, okay, I can't keep just saying the same things over and over, because that's not having the right effect. Maybe another approach would be, I really need to sit down and look at what my priorities are, and it's either A or B. And if she doesn't want to do A, then my response is B. Like, you have to draw hard lines in the sand sometimes for your own health and for your life, for your future and your destiny too. So I would really just say, take a look at why she is allowed to continue acting, saying these things towards you. I definitely don't justify what she is doing, but I feel like there could be some boundary issues going on there, maybe not being established or not being enforced appropriately.
Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's it. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So, and that's perfect. A dovetail. You know, sometimes people in a relationship, the sharing the expectation of what is healthy communication. Because let's look at that for a minute. On the one end, you don't want to every single piece of a person's communication to be so loving and gentle and nature driven that you literally think, oh, well, I've really done nothing wrong, because that's not healthy. But at the same time, you don't want to go so far the other board and say, well, you know, that is just totally worthless and stupid. And you know what? You just need to understand, I'm going to be blunt and just say it like it is, because I might as well tell you so that you spare all this wondering. Okay, well, where is the healthy medium? Where's the healthy balance? Where you get honesty, but you get honesty in a way that is truly constructive. Because the one thing is that I found that and that actually drew me to my ex-wife, was she had a tough personality, and it drew me to her. And I liked that about her. But she was so blunt and so coarse at times. After a while, I started realizing, you know what? It's okay to be honest. But if you're being kind of cruel in your sharing of your feelings, then you really have to ask, why are you having to do that? And it took me a while to realize that people who struggle with narcissism, they get a certain kick out of the beratement by the besmirch, the belittle, etc. And if someone really loves you, the balance between, here is honesty to save you some time and wondering what I'm wondering, but here it is presented in a way that respects who you are. And so my point is that an exercise, and please look through Dr. Storm's materials, but an exercise that you can do is give examples of how would you want to be treated in terms of a conflict conversation, so that at the one end you hear the conflict, but at the same time you don't feel belittled and you feel the word worthless shouldn't be in a vocabulary in terms of a person's being. Absolutely shouldn't. Agreed. So you're right to say that's got to be out. But they may be thinking in their own mind, well, I'm just saying that because I'm just trying to spare you how I think. Well, find that happy balance. And you know what? At some point, all of us, for the growing of who we are, have to find that good balance of how we healthily communicate truth and love. Because it really boils down to that, right? Truth and love, and putting in that balance properly.
No, that's great. So moving on to the next question. This person writes in, everybody is saying forgiveness is something I do for myself, not for the person who hurt me, but why should I forgive somebody who has hurt me?
Well, because they're children of God too, at the end of the day. And there is the potential chance for them to receive the redemption and the growth. And you may think in the midst of the hurt that, yeah, that chance is slim and none, and slim left town. And the truth is that maybe some people can be so entrenched in the narcissism that they may never really change. And that we talked about that earlier. But I guess my point is, when you think about that golden rule, treat others as you want to be treated, we all want a certain degree of grace in order for us to live our lives. And so the question is, how do we make those deposits of grace into other people's lives? And every situation is different, but it's important to think about that, because, at the end of the day, the beautiful thing that we see of Jesus over and over and over again was he was giving these undeserved deposits of grace, I think, as an investment, with the hope that that person would claim who they were as children of God and claim how to live as children of God, which meant more loving, more gracious, more kind to the world around them. And not trying to be Pollyanna or way too positive, but I think one of the reasons that we forgive others is because of that reality, and hoping that God's grace moves in them. The other thing is, it really goes back down to the condition in Matthew chapter 6, and you can also find it in Matthew chapter 19, Matthew 18, where at the very end of the Lord's Prayer, it says, if you want to be forgiven of your trespasses, so too must you forgive others of their trespasses. But if you do not forgive others of their trespasses, neither will your heavenly Father forgive you of your trespasses. That's the conditional element that we forget in that prayer. And if we want to be obedient to God's word, then that means that we need to find ways to be forgiving wherever possible, because it benefits us, but it possibly is an investment that can benefit them. May not take. Their choices may end up be that they'll never take advantage of that, but you can't control that. You can only control what you can do. And for me, I want to think to myself, Lord, am I being forgiving enough to others that I will also receive this amazing forgiveness that you give me? That's how I need to be thinking about how I orient my life.
Mm. That is so good. That's such a pastor answer. Thank you for bringing that to this group and to this live right now. To me, like, I always feel like if you want to be free of the narcissist, that means you have to forgive, because that's a part of the thing that you are trying to forget, that you are trying to move on from. And you can never move on as long as that part is still within you. And forgiveness is really about releasing, all of that and being free from the hurt, the person, the circumstances, the environment that caused it, and being free from all of that in order to move forward. So you keep the lesson. You keep the lesson that you learned throughout this entire thing, but you forgive and release the rest of it so that you can move forward and use your lesson and apply it as wisdom moving forward in your life. But you can never move forward as long as you're willing to, grab on so tightly to all of the wrongs that were done to you. You're still keeping the past alive while you're trying to build something new, and that'll never work. You'll find yourself repeating the same things, even being attracted to the same spirit in a different body, and repeating the process again and again. And that's ultimately, for me, why forgiveness is something that you do for you, because regardless of what the people or person has done to you, you can't control that. What you can control now is what's left. And you can either hold on to what they've done to you, or you can say, you know what, that's not my identity. I'm releasing all of that so that I can move forward and really express who I truly am and walk out my purpose. So to me, that's at least how I think about forgiveness. But I really love your answer, Dan.
Well, and the cool thing with what you said, it can be summed up in a kind of phrase similar to this. We're going to be learning through this course that forgiveness is not about always restoring a relationship. And narcissistic relationships, those relationships may need to be severed for your protection. But really what forgiveness can then embody is forgiveness does not mean I hold your hand. It just means that I no longer hold my hands around your neck. Where you're thinking that's what you want to do. That's what you're visualizing. I'm going to get back at them for the way they wronged me. And I tell you, I'll give examples of this in our course coming up, a personal example from something in business, where the idea is that you free yourself from the toxic frustration, anger, hurt, bitterness, rage, potential hate that can actually permeate you and then limit your capacity to love again yourself, your God, your neighbor. And that's what we want to cut out when we forgive. And so your pragmatic response to my pastoral response is a beautiful compliment, I think.
I love it too. Yeah.
Of what forgiveness really needs to embody on so many levels.
Yeah, and the thing is that people believe like you can just compartmentalize it. So it's like, oh, I just hate the narcissist and I don't forgive that person, but I forgive everybody else and I'm ready to move forward. I'm ready to love somebody else. And you don't realize that it can never be contained. It bleeds into every other part of your life, and you will notice it slowly consuming every other relationship, every other venture, every other type of connection that you are trying to seek, because it cannot be just contained into this one area. And I'm speaking from experience on that too. So exactly what you're talking about, where if you want to move on and move forward, it's about freeing yourself from that toxicity. And as long as you're holding on to it, you are the toxic environment. You're walking around as this toxic thing that's invading all of the other, whether it's in business or relationships or with your family or whatever, your presence is going to be emitting that. We know that thoughts are actual things. They create structures in our brains. They have energy attached to it. We can actually measure thoughts with energy, and so whether you think that that's having an effect or not, just because you can't see it, doesn't mean that it isn't being established. It doesn't mean that it isn't growing and producing fruit. So that's great, Dan. let's see. I got quite a few questions. I don't think we're going to get to these all, so we'll schedule another one and we will do another Q&A session. There was a really good thing. There's a really good question. Let me find it. I'm sorry. Do you believe in forgive and forget? I love this question. Dan, you wanna answer it?
Well, believe in forgive and forget. Well, the reality is, if we understand the nuances of our brain, then we can recognize that some things we can forget and some things we may, our best of our ability, can't. The sad thing is that we're learning more and more from post-traumatic stress disorder, for example, that subconsciously abuse situations can lead to certain elements of PTSD. And maybe the PTSD exists in part because it's meant as a alert/protection mechanism. But then it's because it is subconscious and not controllable, it causes a struggle, et cetera, so forth. My point really in saying all of that is that an element of the PTSD is stuff that really is not being forgotten, if that makes sense. Your brain has stored some element there that it's still firing. The parts of forgetting that we can control, we want to be able to forget some of, I guess, the entertainment of thoughts and emotions that lead to a personal/spiritual toxicity. You want to try to forget that, but then at the same time, you don't want to forget lessons learned amidst the abuse, if that makes sense. So my point is, you learn lessons, you learn how to grow and adapt. You don't want to forget those things. So when you say forgive and forget, certain things you do want to forget. The beautiful thing is, whenever you have forgiven so thoroughly, there are times where you will go long periods and you won't remember certain things that used to be toxic to your soul. And that's beautiful. That means you really have cut the string and forgiveness has moved some. Right. But I don't know that you necessarily forget absolutely everything. And so when someone says forgive and forget, I think the most important thing we can say to them is understand that forget in the neuroscientific element of our mind is much more nuanced and complicated than we might think. So do we forgive and forget? Partly yes, partly maybe not.
Exactly. And I was actually going to say yes and no. Exactly that. Because I believe in not throwing the entire thing, even if you had the ability to completely rewire and restructure your brain and thereby renewing your mind to even forget the whole thing had happened. I really wouldn't recommend you do that. You know, we all do experience things through for a reason, and we learn as we have experiences. And so the lesson that you learned from this situation is very important. You don't want to lose that. That's, in some ways, I feel like the small reward that you get for making it through difficult situations is that you're wiser in that area. I completely agree with you, Dan. I don't think it's necessary for me to add anything else on there, but yeah, I'm not a proponent of forgive and forget to the point of like, I just never remember it or think about it or whatever. I'm definitely a proponent of do not let it continuously, as soon as you think about it, you're having all of these emotional reactions and everything around you is getting triggered. Like that's a for sure sign that somebody didn't forgive, you know, and that there's some forgetting that needs to happen. So absolutely. I agree with both of those. Do you want to do one more question before we call it a day?
Sure.
Okay. Let's see. I think I've forgiven, but I still talk about my hurt. Did I actually forgive?
Forgiveness has a certain layer of complexity to some degree, like the forgetting. Not totally, because I think there is a point where you realize that, yeah, I guess I really have moved on. And so you can kind of come to the realization that, no, I think I'm mostly forgiven. But just because you have little elements or moments where you remember or whatever, those journeys may be with you forever. They'll be every once in a while. Here's a good example of that. I'll give you from an example that I had. So, you know, times where I was hit or threatened with a hammer and threatened. One time I had, I was actually slightly fearful for my life. Fortunately, it was just the one time. And it is weird because, again, I was larger but never been in the gym. She was 6 inches shorter and weighed 80 pounds less. So the important reason why I mention that is because in some ways, there was always something in the back of my mind that said, well, if I really need to defend myself, I think I will be okay. Because, I mean, unless she had mixed martial arts training or something like that, she did. So, and one time I did have to put her in a restraint. It was really a kind of a frustrating thing. And I'll tell you another time about the fact that when I did that, it actually helped. Because before I just kept taking it, and you were always conditioned, particularly growing up in a Christian household. Well, you never hit a woman, so if she hits you, you don't hit back, and those kinds of things, and that made for a really complex and challenging thing. Here's the point in saying all of that is, I remember early on after the divorce, there would be pieces where I would remember, and then there would be just, and then I would process for a few hours something to calm myself down. And then over the years, it got to where those processes were from, it took me a half an hour to calm down in those moments, to then all of a sudden it was almost like 10 or 15 seconds and a deep breath and whatever. And then it was like, okay, I wish no ill will. And I think that the reason I share it that way is because a lot of people, there'll be pieces that can be super quick, but some of it will be gradual. And that's because it's a nuanced and sometimes layered sort of thing. And I only say that because, while our goal will want to be forgiveness to free your own soul for the capacity of love, it's important still to recognize that there's just enough challenges that some of it can happen very, very quickly, but there is the possibility that some of it takes a long time. And that's why your course lays things out over the course of weeks and weeks, because we recognize that humans will absorb and learn and grow and prepare gradually. And you have great wisdom in the way you set up that material for that purpose. So we're going to find that it's going to be a process for a lot of us. And I may not exactly answer the question, but I thought that specific element needed to be introduced for the purpose of answering that question.
Absolutely. And, just for clarification, I took years of my own experience and process and put it into 12 weeks. And in the course, we'll tell you that if you can hurry it up and get done quicker than 12 weeks, good on you. You have the full course manual that you can work through. And if you need longer than 12 weeks, there's no shame in that either. Again, this was years of my own experience, my own learning process that I put into these 12 weeks. And so there's no pressure either way to do it in 12 weeks, less than, more than, it doesn't matter. Everybody gets to go at their own pace. And one of the things about this question that I'd like to just quickly answer is that, my position now where I get to help other people through life coaching, specifically people who are leaving narcissists and stuff like that, I often will share things that had deeply hurt me with them, because I want to either connect with them, or I want them to learn from something that I went through. I want to share, a little wisdom seed or whatever that I got through that experience. So talking about the things that hurt you doesn't necessarily mean you didn't forgive. I believe that it has to do with, like, what is the state of your soul while you're sharing that thing? Are you sharing it to make other people, feel angry for you or sad for you? Are you sharing it because you are sad and angry or whatever, fearful or whatever? Are you, what is the state of your soul? What is your emotional state, your mental state while you are sharing it? What is the reason for sharing something that hurt you? And I also don't want to say, like, if I always try to say, like, whatever I'm talking about, to not veer people away from like not sharing, because we need to connect with other people. We need to be able to have those around us who can share in our joys and in our sorrows. But recognizing, like, one of the things that I would definitely use as like a litmus test for if you've forgiven or not is what kind of emotions come up when you're talking about this hurt. And just because there is emotion, I wouldn't say like necessarily that you didn't forgive or anything like that, but the reason behind why you're sharing should, like, what was actually present there. So I hope that answers that question. We have a few more questions, but I think this broadcast has been long enough. We'll do another one of these so we start May 5th. We'll do another one of these like in a couple of weeks and answer some more. If you guys have more questions, you can always send them in. My email address is in the description of the comments or the description of this video. There's just one other thing that I want to touch on. There's somebody who's watching who is sad, who said that their narcissist broke him. He is sad. She hit him. We are praying for you. We are in agreement with you that situation is going to come to an end one way or the other, because nobody deserves, I don't even want to say deserves, but like nobody is even created to live in that kind of situation. It's like, it's horrible. And Dan has shared about how he has experienced that and lived through it. And my whole testimony is on my YouTube channel. You can go watch it if you haven't seen it already. And I just want to encourage everybody who's on here right now and know that every Monday, my intercessory team and I get together. We pray over every client, every person in the mentorship group, and every comment that has come through that week. So all of you on here who have commented, everybody who's watching on the replay, you're always covered in prayer. And I really believe that that's the number one thing that is necessary in these situations, because you can do all of the right things in the natural, which, by the way, I learned, and that can have zero impact on the situation. So we really need to remember to enter into the spirit realm when we're dealing with this, with these types of issues, because ultimately that's where they're resolved. That's where they're won and lost. So, Dan, do you have anything else that you want to say before we close out?
Actually, if we'd love to talk more, we'll get opportunities to do that.
Yes.
And stuff. But just as you have your YouTube channel for your materials, a lot of my stuff I do on Facebook. Because I'm still a pastor. Actually, I'll just let everyone know I'm retiring in 2021, not from ministry, but just from pastoral ministry, to get into more coaching resources and teaching. And the point of all that to say is, you can check me out on Facebook at Dan Paddock, and I do daily devotions, post every day, and the videos a few days a week, and then be glad to strike up a conversation if you like. But hopefully we'll get the chance to share and learn from each other in this course, because I really am excited about it. I think it's going to be a really life transforming opportunity for so many.
Yeah, me too. And just a reminder, this course is pay what you want right now. So go into the description of this video. You'll see a little link there, and it'll take you through the process of paying whatever you want for this course. Again, it starts May 5th. It's 12 weeks long. You'll have lifetime access to it. So there's no need to like worry if you can't make all of the live sessions. If you can't, you always have the ability to come back and watch the replay. And I will also make sure that Dan's the link to find Dan on Facebook is put in the description as well. So feel free to head on over to his page, shoot him a message. If you send me a message for him, I'll make sure that he gets it. And yeah, we look forward to doing this again in a couple of weeks, to answering a few more of your questions, and definitely to see you guys all in the mentorship course itself. When we ran it I ran it last year. And I saw just such great transformation. I know that this is going to be worthwhile. I know it's just going to be exponentially more because of Dan coming on with his amazing experience, his wealth of knowledge, and the other perspective. I just feel like it's a really complete circle that we get to bring to the group this time. And I'm just so excited to see what happens, what Jesus will do here. So, all right, you guys can find the link to all of that stuff in the description of this video. Dan, thank you so much for joining me today. You guys, thanks so much for tuning in. Thanks for watching the replay video, and we will see you all next time.
Blessings, everyone.
Blessings.